What if the person who has held you back the most in life isn't anyone around you, but someone who lives inside your head and speaks with your own voice? Stop for a moment. Don't keep reading yet. I want you to really think about that. There is a voice in there. You know it perfectly well. It has been with you for as long as you can remember. It tells you that you're not enough when something goes wrong. It brings back that conversation from 3 years ago where you said something you shouldn't have. It convinces you that others are judging you the moment you walk into a room. It whispers that failure is likely before you've even tried anything. And the most disturbing part of all, what nobody has ever told you clearly, is that voice is not you. You have spent your entire life believing it is. You have spent your entire life confusing that constant noise with your identity, with your judgment, with your way of seeing the world. And that confusion, that small but devastating error in perception, is the root of much of the suffering you have carried without knowing where it came from. Today you are going to discover something that will change the way you relate to yourself forever. It is not a productivity technique. It is not a positive mindset trick. It is something far deeper, far more uncomfortable, and far more liberating than any of that. Let's do an experiment right now. I want you to close your eyes for a few seconds. Simply close them and try not to think about anything. Empty your mind completely. Did you try it? What happened? A thought appeared, then another. Maybe your mind started wondering whether you were doing it right, or it remembered something you had left undone, or it simply began watching itself in that strange way, like when you repeat a word too many times and it stops sounding familiar. Now comes the question that changes everything. If you were the one trying not to think, and yet the thoughts appeared on their own, who generated them? Was it you? Or was it something that happens inside you without you deciding it? There is an enormous gap between those two options, and hidden inside that gap is one of the most powerful revelations a human mind can ever have. Neuroscientists have spent decades studying something technically called the default mode network. It is basically the way the brain operates when it is not focused on any particular task, and what they discovered was unsettling. When we are not doing anything specific, the brain does not rest. On the contrary, it activates in a very specific pattern. It starts generating thoughts about the past, about the future, about how others see us, about what we should have said or done differently. In other words, the mind has a program running in the background at all times, a program you did not choose to install, that you did not configure yourself, and that has nonetheless been running your entire life. Think of it this way. Imagine your brain is a computer. You believe you are the user. You think you decide what opens, what closes, what gets processed. But there is a background program that has been active for years, generating pop-up windows you never asked for, processing files without your permission, consuming resources you didn't know you had. That program is you, almost all of the time. And the strangest part is that this program does not help you. It is not designed to make you happy. It is designed to keep you on alert, to anticipate danger, to remind you of past mistakes so they don't happen again. It was useful 200,000 years ago, when the greatest threat was a predator on the savannah. Today, that same mechanism keeps you from enjoying a quiet dinner because it is still processing an argument you had on Tuesday. There is a psychologist named Daniel Kahneman who won the Nobel Prize in economics for something that has nothing to do with money. His most important work is about how we make decisions and how the human mind actually works. And one of his most disturbing conclusions is this: the vast majority of what we think and decide each day does not go through any conscious process. It happens automatically, quickly, unreflectively, and afterward, the conscious mind, the one you believe is you, simply constructs a justification for what already happened. You are not directing your mind. You are narrating what it does on its own. That is terrifying. But it is also the key to everything we are going to explore today. Because if most of your thoughts are automatic, if they arise on their own without you choosing them, then identifying with them is a mistake of enormous proportions. It is as if someone placed a radio in your room without asking, and you spent decades believing you were the one composing that music in real time. I want to tell you about something that happened to someone. We will call her Clara. Clara was one of those people who, from the outside, seemed to have everything under control. A stable job, reasonably good relationships, good health, a life that on paper was working. But every night, just before falling asleep, something would activate inside her. The voice arrived on time, like an appointment nobody had made. It reminded her of what she had said wrong during the day. It anticipated what might go wrong tomorrow. It brought back images of past conversations with almost surgical precision, situations from 5 years ago, from 10 years ago, that her mind revisited again and again, as if there were something to resolve there, as if going over it enough times would change what had already happened. Clara thought she was an anxious person, that was just who she was, that some people were naturally calmer and she simply was not one of them. She had accepted it as part of her identity. "I overthink everything," she would say. "I can't help going over things in my mind." And that was the mistake. She was not those thoughts. She was the one listening to them. Those were two completely different things, but nobody had ever taught her to see it that way. The day Clara truly understood it was not the day she stopped having negative thoughts. It was not the day the voice disappeared. It was the day she was able, for the first time, to observe a thought without automatically believing it. It was the day she could say, "There's that thought again," instead of, "This is what I am." That shift in perspective, seemingly small, was what changed everything. Buddhism has been speaking about this for more than 2,500 years, with a precision that Western psychology took centuries to reach. Meditation, widely misunderstood as a relaxation exercise or a way to empty the mind, is in reality a training in observation. You do not meditate to stop thinking. You meditate to learn how to see thoughts without becoming confused with them. Zen masters have an image I find perfect. They say that thoughts are like clouds. The sky is not the clouds. The sky is behind them, always present, always still, regardless of whether there is a storm or calm. Clouds pass. They change. Sometimes they are dark and dense, sometimes they are light and almost transparent. But the sky does not become a cloud no matter how covered it gets. You are the sky, you are not the clouds. The conditioned mind believes it is the clouds. It believes that when there is a storm, it is the storm. It believes that when there is darkness, it is the darkness. And from that confusion, every negative thought becomes a declaration about who you are, about what you deserve, about what is possible for you. But there is something you can do right now to begin to see the difference. The next time a thought appears that hurts you, one of those that tells you you're not enough, that something is going to go wrong, that others see you in a certain way, do not try to fight it. Do not try to convince yourself it is a lie. Do not argue with it. Do something far more powerful and far more difficult at first. Simply observe it. Imagine you are a scientist who has just detected an interesting phenomenon in the laboratory. You do not judge it. You do not react. You simply observe it with curiosity. Look, the thought that I'm not capable has appeared. How interesting. Where does it come from? When does it show up? What triggers it? In the moment you do that, something shifts in a subtle but radical way. Because to observe a thought, you need to be separate from it. You cannot observe something you are completely submerged in. The very fact that you can look at it already proves that you are not that thought. You are the one looking at it. That distance is the freedom that masters, psychologists, and philosophers have spoken about since the beginning of time, each in their own language, each from their own tradition, but all pointing to the same place. Now I want you to understand something that completely changes the way you see your past experiences. If much of your suffering has come not from what happened to you, but from the thoughts your mind generated around it, then you were not suffering reality. You were suffering the interpretation, an automatic program made of reality. Think about it in concrete terms. Two people receive the same criticism at work. One of them generates thoughts like, "I need to improve, this shows me where to focus." The other generates thoughts like, "I'm not good enough, I never will be, everyone can see it." Both people received exactly the same external stimulus, but their minds processed that stimulus through completely different filters, and each of them lived a completely different subjective reality. The event was identical, the suffering was radically different, and that suffering did not come from outside. It came from the automatic thoughts each mind generated without anyone asking for them. If suffering is largely a mental construction, that does not mean it is not real. It is completely real. It genuinely hurts. But it does mean you have more power over it than you believed. Not because you can decide not to have negative thoughts, but because you can learn not to give them free rein over your life. There is a concept in cognitive psychology called cognitive fusion. It occurs when a person merges with their thoughts, when there is no longer any distance between the one who thinks and what is being thought. The person does not have the thought, "I am a failure." The person believes, they are a failure. They do not process the thought, "This is going to go wrong." They already live in a present where that is a certainty. Cognitive fusion is painful because it turns every negative thought into a statement of identity. And once something becomes part of your identity, defending it becomes as automatic as breathing. You start looking for evidence that confirms it. You begin interpreting reality in ways that fit the story you have come to believe. The human mind has a brutal confirmation bias. When you believe something about yourself, it unconsciously selects all the data that confirms it and ignores everything that contradicts it. If you believe you are socially awkward, every uncomfortable moment in a conversation becomes irrefutable evidence. Every conversation that flows easily is forgotten before the day is over. It is not that reality is confirming who you are. It is that your mind is selectively constructing a narrative it already decided on in advance. And now comes the most uncomfortable point in everything we have discussed today. If that voice is not you, if those thoughts are automatic and conditioned, if the story you tell yourself about who you are has been built by a program that has been running unsupervised for years, then who are you? Really? It is a question that makes people uncomfortable. It produces something close to vertigo in many people. Because if I take away the voice, if I take away the thoughts, if I take away the labels and the stories that have defined me for decades, what is left? What remains is what contemplative masters describe as pure awareness. What remains is the observer, that silent space that has always been there, that never left, that did not change, even as thoughts came and went, even as emotions appeared and disappeared. The one that was present when you were 5 years old and when you are 40. The one that has no opinion on whether you are enough or not, because it simply observes without judging. It is difficult to describe in words, because words are part of the mental noise, but you have touched it before. In a moment of genuine wonder at something beautiful, in the instant just before falling asleep when thoughts dissolve, in those rare moments of total flow when the activity and the one doing it seem to merge into one. In those moments, the voice went quiet, and you were still there. I want to give you 3 concrete things you can start with today. They are not magic solutions. They are doors. Small, solid, and real. The first is naming. When a thought appears that causes you discomfort, instead of sinking into it, name it out loud or silently. The thought that I'm not up to this has appeared. Here is the thought that something is going to go wrong. That simple act of naming it in the third person activates the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with emotional regulation, and measurably reduces the intensity of the reaction. It is documented, it works, and it is something you can do at any moment, in any place, without anyone noticing. The second is physical anchoring. When the voice speeds up, when thoughts begin to chain together in a spiral that seems to have no end, bring your attention to something physical and concrete. The weight of your feet on the floor, the texture of what you are touching, the most distant sound you can perceive. The body is always in the present. Thoughts almost never are. And when you return to the body, even for just a few seconds, you interrupt the automatic loop. The third, and it is the most powerful even though it may seem the simplest, is the question. When a thought generates an intense reaction in you, stop and ask yourself, is this a verifiable fact or is it an interpretation? Most of the time you will discover it is an interpretation, and an interpretation can be questioned. It can be replaced. It can be seen from another angle. A fact has no alternatives. A story does. There is something I find deeply hopeful in everything we have explored today, and I want to end with it. The voice is not your enemy. It is an ancient mechanism trying to protect you with the only tools it has. The problem is not that it exists. The problem is believing it is everything you are. The problem is letting it make decisions that should be made from a deeper, quieter, more genuinely yours place. When you learn to observe it without merging with it, something curious happens. It loses urgency. It loses authority. It keeps appearing, because that is how the mind works, but it no longer carries the same weight. It is like when you discover that the noise that frightened you in the middle of the night was simply the building cooling down. The noise does not disappear, but it no longer paralyzes you. That is the freedom spoken of in every contemplative tradition, in the most solid psychology, in the testimonies of people who went through periods of deep suffering and came out with a different understanding of themselves. It is not the absence of difficult thoughts. It is the ability not to confuse them with reality. You are not that voice. You are the one who listens to it. And that difference, though it may sound small when said out loud, changes absolutely everything. The question I leave you with is the same one we started with, but now it sounds different. If that voice is not you, then who are you, really? Write it in the comments. It does not have to be a perfect or elaborate answer, just the first thing that comes to you when you ask yourself from that quieter place you just touched. Because exploring that question is the beginning of something very few people allow themselves to live. If you made it to the end, comment, "I made it," and I will personally reply to you. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to be part of this, and leave a like if you enjoyed it.